Yeah, I know. Jeez. Thanks, Vic. All right, so moving on into the long run. So the short run is where we variable costs and fixed costs. So the short run, people often ask, well, how much time is the short run? Is it 1 week? Is it 1 month? Is it 1 year? Is it 1 decade? Well, it varies from business to business. Some businesses, the short run is very short because the business can change very, very quickly, right? So if you have a small business, you may be able to have a very short run. It may only be a week because you could change the entire structure of your business when you're the only one running it in a week, right? I mean, it wouldn't take much, right? Whereas if you're a big, huge company like GM or Ford or Chrysler, whoever, how quick can they build an entire new factory? Not very quickly. I mean, granted, it's gotten a lot faster in the last few decades, but it still takes a potentially long time. So I'm going to be purposefully vague on what's the difference between time frames between short and long, and just tell you, in the short run, you have fixed costs. There's something that you're going to have to pay even though you produce nothing. In the long run, everything is variable, right? The idea is that in the long run, you could get the hell totally out of the business, right? So if you quit producing, you could then also sell all of your fixed cost assets, right? You could sell the loan that you have or pay it off entirely or do whatever it is so you don't have any interest to pay. You could sell all of your factories so you're not paying insurance, you're not paying any sort of taxes, all of that business stuff you can get out of, right, in the long run. And similarly, in the long run, you can change the size of your factory to any factory size you like, right? So right now, when GM built the factory, they said there's going to be, on average, this number of cars built per week, right? And it's some number between like 100 and 200 or something like that. In the long run, they could make a factory any size they want, right? They could make a nice small one if they wanted to, where there was maybe only 20 workers, and they cranked out, say, 50 cars a week. They might want to do that, right? If there was a place in the U.S. where salaries were really, really, really bad and they wanted to, to exploit those workers as much as they possibly could, they could do it, right? That's what they were doing in China anyways, right? Same thing. Or they could make their factories really, really, really large, right? So after the U.S. takes over Canada, we could just turn Canada into a GM factory, right? The whole country. It's just one big, huge parking lot and construction site. It's Canada, right? What else is it good for? Maple syrup. Maybe there's some bears and some trees you can hug, but that's about it, right? All right, so what we need to do is to get a picture of how does our average total cost look like when we think about it in that term, in terms of being very long. All right. And again, remember that we can make the quantity that we produce as big or as small as we want. So the way I like to analyze this is imagine, if you will, that we're looking at the phone industry, right? So this whole telecommunications industry that's going on. How many cell phone companies are there that you can buy cell phone service from? There's a bunch. Depends on where you're at. How many did there used to be, say, about 5 or 10 years ago? About 10 years ago, there were only about 2 or 3 left. What had happened 10 years ago that made it such that there were only 2 or 3 left? Technology got better, but there were still lots of those small service phone companies out there, but what were AT&T and Verizon and Sprint doing? They were buying them all up. Why were they doing that? They were looking in the long run, because what was going on was that, imagine, if you will, Sprint was, a decent-sized company, and it was producing this many phones, whatever it is. I don't care what the real number is, but it's this many, all right? And you can put a number there if it makes you happy, 1 billion, 1 million, I don't know, whatever, all right? But they wanted to get bigger. They wanted to produce more. So what they did is they bought up a nice small company. Now, when they bought up that small company and they moved into a higher quantity, the question was, did their average total costs go up or go down? And before you answer, let me tell you what's going on, right? So Sprint or AT&T or Verizon, whatever, they have a management structure, right? They've got president, vice president, bunch of managers, and then a whole bunch of regular workers. The company do they have a management structure? Sure. Of course they do. They've got a president, a vice president, a whole bunch of managers, and then a bunch of workers. When they bought them out, did they have to have the same levels of management exist twice? No. So what did they do? They said, all of you managers in the small company that we just bought out, here's a few $1 million, get out of the business, right? You're done. All of you workers, okay, we'll absorb you in, but will they necessarily hire all of the workers? No, of course not, right? Because that would be an overkill, because in some places they were competing against each other, and now they just want them to work together. And do you need to have the two people to run one spot? Nah, so you get rid of the redundancies, any of those people that you need to get. So what happened to your cost structure on average for producing more quantity? It went down. So what was going on in these firms is that, yeah, they were growing, and what they were doing was lowering their average cost to sell cell phone service to customers. Yeah, I won't say anything about quality. All I'm talking about is cost. Quantity, yes, there is definitely more quantity, right? So they have more cell phones because they bought out all of their customers, and now their customers send them a check every month instead of to, Marshall's small cell phone service company, right? All right, so, and they keep doing this, right? So maybe they were up here to begin with, and they bought one company, then they bought another company.
And then Disney bought them.
But at some stage, what starts happening?
They plane off.
It's going to start leveling off. Why does it level off? Well, I mean, there were a ton of companies, right? I mean, back in the early 90s when cell phones first started taking off, there were a ton. Every little city had their own, at least one cell phone service company, if not 3, 4, 5, just because they were competing against each other locally only. It was kind of about that, but think of it in terms of how they were making their savings. Yeah, it was the lack of redundancy needed in their resources, right? So it was firing all of those managers and getting rid of them. But once you start having 2,000 or 3,000 employees, can you use the same management structure you had before?
Now you need more managers.
You need more managers, right? So now, instead of being able to just fire all of their managers and just absorb all of their workers underneath your current management structure, you're going to have to say, well, crap, now we've got 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people at the bottom rung doing the work, and we've only got 10 managers for them right now. How are those 10 managers doing?
They're quitting.
Yeah, they're way overloaded. They're like, see you the hell later. I'm going to go work for Marshall's small cell phone service, right, that hasn't been bought out by Verizon or AT&T or Sprint yet, right? So they couldn't keep their management structure. So one, they had to start paying their managers more, and two, they had to start hiring more. And so instead of being able to get those great specialization bonuses that lowered their average costs even more and more, at some stage, it started to flatten out. Darn, right? So they could keep taking out more and more companies, but their costs were not decreasing on average because they kept having to deal with more management structure, and their company was spread out further, so they had to have an office building in New York and an office building in LA, and they needed an office building in Chicago and Houston, and they needed offices all over the place, right? That costs money. So that they couldn't quite see the benefit that they were seeing before.
Wouldn't it also cost them money to upkeep on the cell phone towers? It's what my fiance does.
Oh yeah, because that's part of the deal, right? So the more they're buying these companies, right, the more of them you have to put up. So the idea here is that initially, yes, this region where your average cost is falling, this is where companies are enjoying what's known as the economies of scale. So in other words, as they got bigger, instead of having to have higher average costs, they were actually lowering them because they were specializing, right? So this is where you see specialization, and I'll just call it specialization bonus, all right? And the concept is that the more they added, the more efficient they could be. But at some stage, they got so big that their efficiencies, they couldn't gain from them anymore, right? So did that stop Sprint, AT&T, and Verizon? I mean, did they stop at 4 or 5 companies that they bought? No, of course not, right? I mean, if it's profitable, you keep buying, right? And the price of cell phones in the 90s was, it used to be you could get a cell phone and pay $5 a month for service, right? Or you could buy it per minute, right? And what did those cell phone companies do in the 90s, mid to late 90s and 2000s? They said, no, you can't buy minutes anymore. You have to buy an entire service so that you pay us $40 to $50 a month. Oh, and you want texting? Tack on another $5 or $10. Oh, you want a voicemail? Tack on another $5 or $10. You want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So we were the ones paying for this, but, So now they keep growing, right? So they keep adding. But now what happens is that their costs, their average cost, stays the same, right? Again, think of this average. Their costs are still going up. It's not like their costs aren't going up. This is just the average based on the quantity that they're producing, all right? So this next region here, where the long-run average cost curve is really flat, we have what's called the constant returns to scale. So as they scale bigger and bigger and bigger, their average costs don't grow, but they also don't shrink anymore. They've lost the ability to specialize because they're too spread out, they're too big, they have to have too many meetings. And let's face it, folks, the best way to waste money and time is to have a meeting. 10 years of going to at least 3 meetings a week, shoot me in the head. Anyway, so does that stop, AT&T and Verizon from growing? It stopped Sprint, folks. They stopped growing. They quit buying companies. Partially because they ran out of cash, but also because they started hitting this stage and said, oh, crap, we can't lower our costs anymore. So they slowed down. So, but what did AT&T and Verizon keep doing?
Buying up the ones they didn't buy.
Oh, heck yeah, they kept buying more. They weren't stupid. But eventually now, they were getting big, right? And what happened is that at some point in time, they got too big. Right? They had 40, 50, 60 different offices spread throughout the U.S., just within the U.S., right? Did they stop in the U.S., folks?
No.
Heck no, right? They slipped into Canada, they slipped into Mexico. Did they stop there, folks? No, they're worldwide now. Their cell services are spread throughout everywhere. And how do you keep European phone service and American phone service on the same billing structure, the same concept? No, it doesn't work at all. They had to come up with entirely different billing structure. They had to learn to speak different languages, all that crap, Basically what it meant is that they had to keep paying more and more on average for the service that they were providing for people. So this is what's known as the diseconomies of scale. And basically this is just where you're too big for your own britches. To keep everybody on the same page costs too much money. It just costs money. Now, the question is, why would a company ever get this big? But look, their costs are going up. That means they have to pay more. How would greed factor into it? I mean, it does. Don't get me wrong.
They're still getting a crap ton of profit.
They're still getting profit because what we don't have in here is we have all the costs. What's missing to determine whether or not they're making money? The revenue. These are the costs. We need to see where the revenue is. In other words, what's the price? What's the price of the service that they're providing? If this is where price is, if this is how much we're paying for cell phone service, and this is how much it costs them to provide that cell phone service, as long as your price is above your cost, guess what you're doing, folks?
Making money.
You're profitable, right? And that's what you want. And this is, again, remember, this is economic profit on top of this, right? This is them making money and giving some of it to shareholders so that they keep giving them more money so that they can buy more companies and get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? I mean, it's the process of capitalism in the U.S. So as long as that price stays up here, they're going to keep pushing the envelope, right? Sprint stopped somewhere around in here and said, we're quite happy with this profit margin. We want to keep it there. That's good enough for us. We'll stop. And, of course, what ended up happening is that they sold themselves out of the business until the government split them all up again, and then this whole thing had to start over. And guess what's been happening for the last 5 or 10 years after the government split up all of the phone companies?
They're busy buying each other up.
They're busy buying each other up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger again and going back to the same way they were before, right? I mean, whatever.
Is it like breaking up a yard fight with, kids?
Sort of, except it's more along the lines of you're breaking up a big, huge group of people, splintering them off, and they say, oh, wait, we can save money if we come back together again. And they say, oh, yeah, great, let's do that. And so they do. Right? Again, not a good thing, not a bad thing, just a thing. And again, the idea here is there's 3 stages of a business as it grows. As we get a business, as you start your own business, your costs will be high. That's a part of life, right? Because you have fixed costs that you have to pay for to run a business. So you got to buy licenses, you got to bribe the appropriate officials. Apply for the appropriate licenses. That's what I meant to say. Whatever. I mean, all of that money is going to have to be averaged into the cost it takes you to produce whatever it is you're going to make. And as you make more of those, right, it doesn't cost you more for the license. It just so that it averages into there and it gets lower and lower and lower. That's the idea of getting bigger. That's what you want, right? That's what makes you more money in theory. All right? So, again, the keys to the long-run analysis. 1, knowing the different economies of scale. And 2, realizing that the long run is there's no more fixed costs, right? Everything is a variable. You can change whatever you want. This is the true la-la land, right, where anything goes. All right. All right. Make sure I didn't skip anything. Okay. Oh, so can you think of any other businesses that have gotten into this diseconomies of scale? So businesses that are so large, they're paying more to produce more of their units, but they don't care, they keep growing. Oil companies? Are oil companies buying up other oil companies? But I mean, they're producing tons and tons. Have they, but that's what they're trying to do, right? They keep searching for more spots to drill for oil, right? So they're even drilling in, like the ocean, right? I mean, do you think that's cost effective to drill down 2 or 3 miles underwater?
No,
Think how much?
Big spill.
Whoosh, that never happens because they're regulated by the government, and so don't think about it; it'll make you crazy. But yeah, any of those companies that have gotten really big, almost a guarantee that all of the oil companies, to produce more oil, they're spending more on average to get the oil. And the reason that they do is because it's sell it, right? As long as they can keep the price up, they'll keep looking for oil anywhere. They'll go up to the moon and drill there if they know that there's oil up there, right? As long as it's going to make them money, you do it, right? That's right. But again, remember, the more time we have, the more elastic our demand becomes, right? The longer gas prices are hovering above $3 a gallon, what are we going to do more and more of? Walk, find substitutes, ride horses, ride bikes, whatever. All of a sudden you'll start seeing at the grocery store, instead of just having parking stalls, you're going to have hitching posts. I mean, why not, right? I mean, think about rural areas where, you don't want to have to drive 2 miles to get to the grocery store if you've got horses, right? Just hop on the horse, ride to the store, and you don't want the horse to wander around. I mean, come on, what do horses do? That's why you get hybrid cars, right? That's what you run it on electricity instead of on gas. Combinations thereof. All right, so that's Chapter 6. I am now officially assigning the homework from Chapter 6. In case you don't remember what it is, it's numbers 3, 4, 6, and 8, right? $127 and $128 or something like that, or $128 and $129, $127, $128. Yeah, do on Monday. We will review it on Monday, basically. All right, so I do want to at least start in on Chapter 7. I don't expect to finish it, although it would be really nice. So again, Chapters 5 and 6 were really more set up to get to Chapter 7, because Chapter 7 is where we're finally doing something real. We finally start getting to talk about a product and when are we profitable making or producing or selling this particular product. All right, so Chapter 7 is titled as Perfect Competition. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at types of markets. All right? So we're not going to look at a specific industry. That's what you'll do in your business classes, where you want to look at one specific industry and decide where they went wrong and where they went right. In this class, we want to generalize as much as possible. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, what defines an industry that is in a perfect competition? Well, there's 3 standard traits that economists use to describe every industry. All right? The first thing that describes the industry is how many sellers are there. Okay, so how many people are selling a specific product? In a perfect competition, there need to be a buttload of them. All right? Don't write that one down, though. I mean, you could, but note I'm not writing it on the board. All right, so there need to be lots and lots and lots. And in quotes or in parentheses over here, I'll say almost infinite. Obviously, there can't be an infinite number of them for real, but, you know, basically as close as you can get. All right, the second thing that has to happen for an industry or a product to be considered a perfect competition is that they produce a homogeneous product. Okay, now, how many of you know what homogeneous means?
I thought you said homogeneous. Completely different.
Yep, slightly different. A homogeneous product, basically, everyone makes exactly the same product. And the way I like to say it is that there's no product differentiation. Just because I like to say that word. Differentiation. Right? Anytime you can use a word that's got more than 5 syllables, use it.
Can you give an example?
Homogeneous. Differentiation.
You know, I'm talking about homogeneous product.
Oh.
What makes the word exactly gets.
We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. I got to give you the third topic, and then we'll get to it. All right? All right, so the third thing that you want to, that describes it is how easy is it to get in and out of the market, right? So it's ease of entry, basically. And in a perfect competition, it's very easy to get in and out of this particular market. All right, so now we'll get back to you, Vic, here. The question is, can you think of an industry where there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of producers of this good? So don't just think of them as sellers, but they're also producers, makers at the same thing.
Farmer company.
Farmers. What do you mean by farmers?
Dairy farmers.
Milk. Milk could be one of those types of products. Right? So milk, exactly the same product, right? If you're milking a cow or your neighbor's milking a cow, is there any difference between the milk you're getting out of those 2 cows?
Depends on how many hormones.
Cow's named Bessie, the other was named Ruth.
Or, again, like another thing that you could, my favorite one is feed corn. Eggs is another one. Although, as we have started to see in these markets, what have people started saying about milk, right? You start talking about, well, how many hormones did you give the cow? How did you milk the cow? Were you nice to the cow as they went into the pen where they strap on the udder milkers? And because we care about how cows feel, folks. We do. I swear. Again, feed corn's another one of them, right? If I'm growing feed corn in my, 30 acres of land, is it any different than the feed corn that they're growing in Brazil? That's feed corn. Again, it's corn that's only meant to be eaten by cattle. Might be, but do they actually try and tell the difference between the two of them?
Hardly.
I mean, have you ever seen an advertisement for TV? No. Right? That's why I like to talk about no product differentiation, because if you've ever seen a product on TV advertised, that's them telling you my product's different. if it's been advertised, it's not in a perfect competition, all right? Which is why it's tough to think of these markets sometimes because, I mean, what do we know? We know the things that we see, and the things we see are mostly advertisements, right? So this is really industries where there really isn't a whole lot of advertising, like feed corn, like potentially beef or pork, right? Essentially, think of it as being, commodities. So do you see anybody advertising that they sell silver that's different silver than someone else? No. Or even really gold for that matter. I mean, has anyone ever advertised? I mean, they'll advertise jewelry, right? But that's not just generic gold, right? If you're buying generic gold, right, you are a jeweler and you're trying to find who's selling you the cheapest gold. Are you going to find someone who sells it less than someone else? No. It's all market price, right? So the market sets the price for all of these products, right? So when you go to sell feed corn, right? So think about it, right? If I'm a farmer and I have 1,000 acres of land that I'm producing corn on, right? Because corn right now prices are really high, so I just grew corn. When I go to sell my corn, I harvest it and I take it into the silo to sell it to the guy who's the feed corn guy, right? Whatever. You take truck after truck after truck to the place where you sell it to. How much are you going to sell it for? You're going to try and get the best price, but are you going to be able to haggle with the guy who's buying the corn from you? No, he's going to say, I heard the old guy on the radio this morning. He got on the radio this morning at 4:30 in the morning and said, corn up 7 cents to $7.52 a bushel. Guess what everybody gets for corn that day? $7.52 a bushel. This is why farmers get up at 4:30 in the morning to hear that old guy on the radio who's been saying it for 50 some odd years, and this is all it does every morning. Gets on the radio and he says corn down 2 cents a bushel to $7.45 a bushel. Wheat up 17 cents to $6.55 a bushel. Beef down 2 cents a pound to $16.22 a pound. Right, and that's all he does for about 20 straight minutes. Absolutely fascinating. No, I'm serious, right? I mean, I listen to him as many times as I can.
What channel is this?
Public radio, right? It's the farm report every morning about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, so that you know how much money you're going to make when you go to sell your commodities, right? And
down in Chicago, they're doing the same thing at the stock market every day.
Of course.
That's the same version.
Right.
A different version of it.
Oh yeah, well what that guy's doing is actually reading off the ticker from Chicago. I mean, that's all he's really doing. It's not like he's making them up. He's reading it off the going rate. So the idea here is that you as a seller, do you get to pick what price you sell your goods at? No. All right. So these are the traits that define you, but there are some other characteristics that unfortunately you have to deal with when you are in this market, right? And one is that you are a price taker. You don't set the price, you get the price told to you every morning at 5 or 4:30 in the morning by some old guy who undoubtedly is wearing a John Deere baseball cap. He's got fingers that are as wide as, is somebody's wrist. Because that's those farmers, right? That's what the big meat hands. They've been pulling corn and dealing with the...
They're called lunch grabbers.
Hey, amen. It's potentially possible. Depends on how, depends on which part of Iowa, right? All right, so anyways, why, though, are you a price taker? Why do you agree to just take the price? Yeah, if you tried to say to the guy who's buying your feed corn, no, I'm not going to take the $7.52 that the guy said. I want $7.53. What's he going to say?
I'll buy it from somebody who sells it for $7.50.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, come back tomorrow, whatever. It might be $7.53 tomorrow if you're lucky, right? If you're not, well, tough luck for you. Price is always dictated to us in this particular market. And the reason why is really number one up here. Are there any farmers out there that are big enough such that if they don't sell their feed corn, that the entire market suffers? Yeah. Not that we know of. I mean, there might be, but So think about all the corn that's produced in say, a communist nation, right? Think of Russia getting together back being a communist nation, and instead of having individual farmers, it was just the Russian, this is Russian corn, and there's only one company because it's Russian, and that's what you're told to do, and this is what you get, right? So even the entire country of Russia, when it was a communist nation, it only sold its corn as an individual country, wasn't big enough to affect the entire corn market. Because there was in all of the countries in Europe, there were all the countries in South America, there were all the countries in Central America and Northern America and Africa that were producing corn, and folks, they produce corn everywhere. Because there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. In fact, almost infinite number of sellers. All right, so you don't get to pick the price, you get told what the price is. And this is why farmers have gotten craftier in their older age. And when a farmer goes to sell his crop, does he sell all of it at once? No, right? He'll sell a third of it when he first harvests it. And usually when you sell that first third, why does the farmer sell their first third? Pay the bills, right? Get enough cash to, actually, not go into receivership. Right? And then they hold the rest of it. Why do they hold it? Why would price go up in the future?
Because it seems like there's less of it.
Well, except it's the other way around. It's not demand that drives the price. What drives the price up later on? Supply. So normally, if you think about it, most farmers, if you think about them in terms of South America, Africa, maybe even the Far East, do they have enough money to not sell every bit of corn that they get right when they harvest it? Probably not, right? These are people that are at the subsistence level, right? They're just barely squeaking by. So as soon as they get their corn, they're like, crap, I got to sell it all so that I can, pay off the mafia that's going to shoot me if I don't pay them off, etc., right? So they sell usually right around harvest time. Prices are pretty low because everybody who has harvested is selling what they have to sell, right? And all those people that have to sell early, well, tough luck, right? But those people that can wait, they wait until it's December or January because now there's nobody's harvesting, right? So the supply has gone down, and what happens when supply decreases? This graph should look very familiar, right? This is regular old graph, right? So this is in the overall market, right? So somewhere like in Chicago where they've got a stock exchange where they're selling corn, and this isn't any of the large stock exchanges where they're selling commodities, right? They'll set the price for that region. They'll say, okay, based on the amount of corn that people are buying and the amount of corn that has been supplied, we will sell 100 billion bushels of corn on any given day. And based on that 100 billion bushels of corn, the price of corn will be $7.25 a bushel, right? So this is feed corn. This is sometime in the middle of, of August or so, right around harvest time. When January rolls around, there's not a whole lot of harvested corn. The people who don't have silos that they can store their corn in, what do they have to do? They got to sell sooner, right? I mean, you don't want to let it sitting out in the middle of the ground too long, or eventually it's going to soak up too much water, and if it soaks up too much water, then you have to pay to have it dried, etc., etc. It's bad, right? So you sell it sooner. But if you keep waiting and waiting, you got a nice silo that dries your corn for you, you wait. And then you wait because the supply in the overall market. So eventually, all those people who wanted corn, they bought it early because they knew the price was going to be low. So when the supply fell in the overall market, it actually shifted. What happened to the price of feed corn? It went up. Shot up to $7.75 a bushel. And those farmers who could save their corn to wait for the prices to go up, that's when they got back in the market, because back then, now there's only, say, 80 billion bushels of corn sold on the market that given day. And again, obviously, these supply and demand shifts day to day, depending on what all of the buyers and sellers of corn are doing. Right? And these buyers and sellers, it's not people like you and me, right? We don't buy and sell feed corn. These are large conglomerates or countries that are buying and selling this stuff, right? So that they can feed their cows. But, again, so the overall market sets up the price. This is the overall market. This is the sum of every farmer that's out there. What does the graph look like for an individual farmer? All right, now, you got to be clever here. You're a farmer. You're growing however much corn you're growing. What does your demand for your corn look like? In other words, what price are you going to get for your corn if you sell it? The very bottom price, or whatever price it was for the given day that you're going to sell. So if you sold 1 bushel of corn, how much would you get paid for that bushel of corn on this day? What if I sold 2 bushels of corn? Yeah, but how much would I get paid per bushel? If I sold 10 bushels? 100 bushels? 1,000 bushels? So if I wanted to graph what the price was or what my demand for my corn is for any bushel size that I want to sell, right? If I want to sell 1 bushel, how much am I going to get paid for it? $7.25. Oops. Ooh. Right? So if I sold 10, I was going to get $7.25. If I sold 100, I was going to get $7.25 a bushel. If I sold 1,000, there's another 0. I got $7.25. If I connect those dots, what does it look like? A nice straight flat line. What my? Ooh, hey, isn't that cool? Right? So when you are a price taker, you have a flat demand curve for every individual. Thanks, Dave. I'm a penny richer. Woohoo! Oh. Yeah, no. Welcome to being a teacher. All right. So we have this wonderfully flat demand curve, and remember again that this means your demand is perfectly elastic. And it's always great when you can put 2 chapters together and actually have something mean something. All right, so now the question is, given that, again, what a farmer does is that they have to guess what the price of corn is going to be when they go to sell it. And obviously, if they're selling it at multiple times, maybe they'll compute an average in general. But then the question is, how much corn should have that farmer produced at the beginning of the season? Right? That's the tricky part, right? Now, if prices of corn are extremely high, up at here is 7.25 per bushel, which for corn folks is really high. Right? Back in the 90s and the 80s, price of corn was about $3.10 a bushel. It was cheap back then. Lots of farmers were hurting back then. Anybody who's a farmer right now is really happy. They're doing well, right? As long as they're not getting hit by drought or flood or all those other natural disasters. All right, so the question then is, how do we figure out how much to produce? So we have the revenue in here because we know what it's going to be. It's going to be $7.25 a bushel for whatever we sell. So if we have the price, how do we determine whether we're profitable?
How much it costs.
How much does it cost? Well, crap. How do cost curves look like? What did we just do in Chapter 6?
We just wrote a cost curve.
We drew a bunch of cost curves, right? So do you think the cost curves for farmers are any different than anybody else? Nope. So guess what I'm going to draw up here? Well, I'm going to draw some cost curves. Okay, so for this example, let's assume that his costs, this farmer's costs, here are his average total costs. Here are his average variable costs. And then this is the minimum, and that's the minimum. So here's marginal cost. Cost curves will always look the same, folks. It doesn't matter what industry, and you're always going to draw a smiley face with the line shooting through the middle of it, right? Always. Which, sort of the nice thing about this part of it is that when I ask you to draw cost curves, you'll always basically draw the same thing. The question is whether or not you draw them higher up or lower down. All right, now I've drawn it here just to prove a point for right now. Now, the question is, where does this farmer produce? What if I told you this was a Brazilian farmer? All right, so the question is, normally under normal circumstances, right, in order to be profitable, what do you need to have the price be? Well, if you want it to be profitable, you need to have the price be higher than however much it costs for you to make your item, right? You'll always be profitable as long as the price is greater than whatever it costs you to make it. So the question up here is, which one of those lines tells you how much did cost increase for one additional unit that you produced? Now, average total cost is averaging them all over through all of the different ones that you produce. I just want to know how much did any one unit add to my total cost? Marginal cost. What is the definition of marginal cost? It's how much did adding one production unit cost me overall. So basically what I want to say is that as long as my price, again it's also my demand, as long as my price is greater than my cost, I will produce to that, I will grow that unit of corn, right? And the cool thing is that right here, that's the magic point, right? If I move further to the right, if I move over here to this point, how much did it cost me to make this one unit? It cost me that much, because remember, that's what marginal cost is talking about. How much cost, or how much did I have to add the total cost to produce that one extra unit? This is how much it costs, this is how much you're going to pay for it, or get paid for it. Are you going to produce that unit? No. Obviously not. All right. So the key here is making sure that you produce to a point where you're getting paid more than that particular item costs, which that one I hope I don't have to explain. The hard part is figuring out which ones of these lines are telling you those two pieces of information. So in a perfect competition, how much you get paid per item is whatever the market told you. How much it costs is the marginal cost.
We're not factoring anything like opportunity costs or any of that stuff.
Oh no, that's all into these cost curves. Yep, that's all part of the average total, average variable, marginal cost curves, right? Now, the thing about it is, right, I mean, built into this, into these cost structures right now, is what kind of feed corn or feed seed did the guy buy to produce corn? And so if you know anything about farming, there's different types of seeds you can buy. There's cheap seed, which will produce, say, 120 to 150 bushel of corn per acre. Or you can buy the really expensive Monsanto seed that produces 180 to 200 bushels per acre, right? So your corn can grow much closer together and still produce viable corn, right? If you need to have your output larger because the price is way high, which kind of corn seed are you going to buy? Yeah, you're going to buy the high yield stuff, but that's only if you know the price is going to be high enough to make it worthwhile so that your cost curves can be out here a bit more, right? Flattened out a little bit more. When you buy the low yield ones, your cost curves will be shrunk and be narrower inside the curve, right? That's built into this, but I mean, if we had the whole semester to just deal with microeconomics, we would spend time on it, it'd be a blast. But we don't. So all I'm going to say is stick with one generic cost curve, and technically those things are in there, but we're not going to talk about them. We're going to sweep them under the rug a little bit. All right, so the question then is, so now we know, here's where we produce. So we're going to produce, whatever this number is. Suppose it's, say, 600 bushels of corn, whatever. So at the beginning of the season, assuming we're going to get paid on average $7.25 a bushel, we're going to grow 600 bushels worth of corn. What? How many acres that requires? Because that's going to be the most cost effective. Now the question is, were we profitable or not?
Isn't that between the...
No, you're absolutely right.
Between the two dots on the line where marginal cost is.
All right, so how much are we paying per average for each bushel of corn at 600 bushels? What's the average total cost at 600 bushels? Yeah. Right, so at 600 bushels, where we hit the average total cost, this is what's going to be the average cost per bushel of corn we grow. And that's going to be something like, $6 a bushel. And remember our price is $7.25 as set by the market. Are we making a profit?
We're making a profit, and if you only sell 1/3 and sell the rest later when the price goes up, you can make a higher profit.
You could potentially even make a higher profit, right? But let's assume, for all of our examples in this class, we're going to assume we're going to sell everything all at once, so that it's not real, but it's easier.
Like a third world country then.
Yeah. Basically, we're a bunch of starving artists. We have to get our money right away, right? Because we have lots of debts we have to pay off, et cetera, and we have to buy new cars and stuff like that, or tractors, right? And don't forget that a new tractor from John Deere costs you somewhere between $1 and $2 million. My cousin bought a new one last season because he had so much money he needed to invest it in the business so he didn't pay tax on it. So he bought a new one in cash, $1.25 million. This is the older model. I mean, these are also the sorts of things that have 18 steps to get to the cab. And when you get in the cab, it's got surround sound, it's got air conditioning, it's got a fridge, it's got GPS. I mean, so when he farms, basically he sits out there and drinks soda. Exactly, turns on the autopilot. The thing will, if he's on a hill, it'll automatically shift the appropriate units so that it's at an angle, and when it gets to a flat part, it'll flatten them out, and then this cool crap. But that's what $1.25 million buys you.
And you said he's married?
Yeah, sorry. He married the banker's daughter, too, so it's like the two people with money got together and made tons of money. I'm just like, dude, you're buying the beer. Okay, so the idea is that the difference between where the price is, again, please look at it as price, not the marginal cost. The price at $7.25 a bushel and your costs at $6 a bushel, the difference between those, $1.25, and that's your profit per bushel, right? So this stuff is your profit.
What about
Average variable cost is in there, right? So the idea is that your average variable cost for producing it is maybe $5.80. So, but that's just to produce it. Remember that you've got fixed costs. So, when you buy that the total is adding in the fixed costs instead of just the variable costs. All right? So here, these are our farmers this season, right? They're doing really well. They're making $1.25 per bushel that they're selling. They're laughing themselves all the way to the bank, right? All them farmers are getting rich. Don't cry for them this season. Unless, of course, they had a drought or a fire or natural disaster, right? So when all the other farmers out there who are growing soybeans or wheat or cotton or pick your hay, whatever your other favorite commodity is, they see that my cousin buying a new tractor, and he bought a new airplane, and he had so much money he didn't know what to do with it. What do they do next season? They plant corn instead of beans, right? They're like, holy crap, look at the money. I mean, he's got so much money from his farm that year that he had to buy a plane and a tractor and new house, and nice house, too. And, he did very well, right? So what do they do next season? What do all these people who see him making tons of money do? They jump into the corn industry, right?
He goes back to beans.
He does have to rotate his crops, but let's assume that there's no such thing as rotation at this stage. But So we think about it, and everybody says, okay, we're growing corn next season because that, $7.25 a bushel, making that much money, wow, okay? Now, if everybody in the market switches to making corn, right? So even the people out in Europe and Russia and China and South America, they all switch to corn too, right? Because they see that the price of corn is so high. What happens in the world market when lots of new sellers join the market? Supply increases, right? Well, be careful. Don't say that demand drops, but say that. Well, even our quantity demand doesn't really drop. What ends up happening, what drops? Our price falls, right? If everybody switches to corn the next season, our supply increases, and as our supply increases, what happens to the price? It's got to drop, right? That's what more supply means, right? So as the price goes down, what happens to the price the farmers are getting next season? Is it going to be $7.25 a bushel? No. And so if supply all of a sudden drops way down here, or if this is now our demand, our new price is now below $5.80 a bushel, what happens to our poor farmers who all grew corn that season? Oops. Yeah, they ain't buying new tractors that season, right? Once your price gets down below all of your average cost curves, this is where you are actually not only losing economic profit, but you're actually losing accounting profit, right? Think about it right here. The cool thing about it is that the optimal point for any farmer to produce is always going to be where your marginal cost hits this perfectly elastic demand curve. This will always be optimal, right? Because remember, everything over here theoretically is less. But on average, what ended up happening, right? Here's how much we had to pay. This is the variable amount. This is our total amount. What's happening to this poor farmer? Yeah. Yeah, he's paying more to produce it than he's getting when he sells it at the silo, right? So what happens to that poor farmer? He's out of business, right? And in fact, what will often be said in the market is that when your price point is below your average variable cost, that's actually where you don't even bother to harvest your corn. You leave it out in the field. If it's going to cost you more to pull it up and package it and ship it to the silo, then it's going to cost you then you're going to get paid for it. Why bother? And so that's why a lot of times in December or January, you might see some farmers who have corn sitting out in the field. Why? Because the price is too low to make it worthwhile. It's going to cost them more to harvest it than not. Why bother? Again, that's just solid business, right? Look at your cost analysis and determine whether or not it's going to be worth it. All right, so we will play around with this a lot more next week. And we will give you some more traits that go on with perfect competitions and how they work in the real world-ish.